I mean, it was terrible, right? You would have rather stayed at home than go on this vacation. Like maybe your father refused to stop so your little brother wet his pants. Or you got to the hotel and finally found out that they were booked solid and you slept in the car that night. Maybe you're traveling to the beach and you found out the beach was closed. I'm talking about a vacation that bad. Well, I've been subject to a vacation that was awful. I was going on a cruise, and I'd never been on a cruise before, so I was extremely excited. But this wasn't just any cruise. This was a Disney cruise, okay? I was going to be hanging out with Mickey and Minnie and Goofy and Donald. We were going to be partying up on the sea. It was going to be awesome. So when the boat took off, I was off. I hit up the arcade, I went to the pool, they had this big giant slide, I ate tons of food, and I even watched the sunset over the ocean. That was amazing. But that night, I felt something in my stomach, and I ran to the bathroom, and that's where I spent the rest of the night. It was terrible. In the morning, I pulled myself together enough to go see the onboard physician. He took an inventory of my symptoms, he gave me an injection, and he sent me back to my stateroom. Now, the bad part wasn't that I got sick, because I was better within a couple hours. The bad part was they quarantined me. They locked me in that stateroom like I was a prisoner. They deactivated my card. I couldn't go anywhere on that ship. I had to stay in that stateroom for the remainder of that trip. It was terrible. While my friends are out eating filet mignon, I was eating room service burgers. And they were out exploring the seas and everything. I was watching movies. I hated it, and I didn't even get my money back. Oh, it was terrible. Wish I would have never, wish I would have never gone. But as terrible as my trip was, there's a trip in the Bible that it's a story that's just 100 times worse. I would rather relive my vacation over and over again for 100 years than experience one agonizing hour of this trip. And where mine was comical, this one's not. It's very tragic and sad. It's full of hate, lust, evil. It's just an awful vacation. It starts out with the concubine and the Levite. Now, the concubine, she works hard. She cleans and she cooks and she makes sure the Levite's taken care of. But what does that Levite do? He just sits there and nags her and gets on to her. So she's had enough. So she packs her bags and she heads back to Daddy. Now, after 3 months, this slug decides that it's time to get his woman back. So he decides to take the trip over to see her father. Now, when the father sees the son-in-law out at a distance, he's filled with joy. He runs out and he hugs him. He's like, "Oh, thank God you're here. I missed you so much. We have so much to talk about. Please come inside. I'll make you a meal and we'll just spend time together." And that's what they do. They go in, he prepares this great meal for them. They sit down. They talk about everything. They talk about the weather, their golf game, what they've been watching on TV. It was awesome. We've been having an amazing time. And they went to bed that night. The next morning, the Levite decides it's time to go home. But the party was just getting started. The father runs out and is like, no, you've got to stay. You have to stay. Stay here with me. We can have another meal. We can talk more. I rarely ever get to see you. So that's what they do. They stay another night, and another night, and another night, and another night. So the Levite, having partied all week long, decides it's time to go home. He gets his stuff together, and they're on the way out the door, and the father's like, no, come on, you have to stay. Again, just stay for lunch. We'll have lunch together, and then you can be on your way. So that's what they do. They have a great lunch, and then they're ready to go. But the father's like, no, it's getting dark now. You can't travel at night. But the Levite insists, we have to get home. We have stuff to take care of. So they feed and water the animals, and they're on their way out. Soon, the afternoon turns into evening. It starts getting very, very dark. He starts getting nervous, and one of the servants, he looks at his master and he says, you have to stay somewhere. We can't stay out here on the road at night. There are people who would hurt us and rob us and kill us. We have to find somewhere to stay. And the master's like, oh, I agree. We have to find somewhere. We'll stop at the next town. When we get there, I'm sure we'll be taken care of. So they They make the trip, getting more nervous as it starts getting darker and darker. They finally make it to the next town by dusk. They sit in the town square, hoping someone will look down upon them with mercy and ask them into their house. People keep walking by, and they don't even look at them like they're not even there. They don't know what they're going to do. They can't spend the night out in the town square. Someone could attack them. It would be awful. But they don't know what they're going to do. People start leaving, and the sun starts setting behind them. And finally, a worker shows up, coming home from the fields. He shows up and he sees the group. "Friends, what are you doing out here?" "Well, you see, sir, we're travelers, and we're wondering if someone would ask us into their home, but no one has. No one's even looked at us." "Well, friends, this is your lucky day. I got plenty of room. You can come stay with me. I'll make you a great meal. We'll make sure your animals are taken care of, and we'll make sure that you have a great night." So they're excited. They have somewhere to stay. They don't have to sleep out underneath the stars in the cold, hard floor. So they gather their stuff. They go back to the house. They make sure the animals are taken care of. They make a great meal. And they sit down, they start eating. And all of a sudden there's this great roar outside. A terrible noise. The master of the house is worried. He jumps up from the table, he runs and throws the door open. Before him stands a group of men from the city. They look violent and they look mad. They start yelling and screaming, and you can barely make it out, but he hears one of them make the demand. "Send out that Levite man you have in there. We want to have a little fun. We're a little bored this evening." Now, the master, he goes, "Please, don't do this. Don't do this to this man. That would be evil. You're my brothers. Don't do this to the city. He's my guest. I have a virgin daughter and he a concubine. I'll throw them out. You do whatever you want to them. Leave this man alone." But the crowd gets restless and angry. They don't want to settle. So they start yelling and banging on the doors of the house. So the Levite runs and tosses the concubine out in front of the crowd. She stumbles and falls at the feet of the mob. The mob, realizing that this may be as good as it gets, they pick her up and they take her off into the night. While the Levite sleeps that night, the concubine is raped and beaten, subjected to torture, agonizing and excruciating beating. She's violated as if it's a game. She's the night's entertainment. As she is tortured and beaten, the morning soon comes. The men, tired of their game, they're all spent. They send the concubine back home. She makes an excruciating journey back to the house that should have been her salvation. Should have saved her. She stumbles, swollen and bloody and broken. She makes it to the house, to the door. She feels the weight of her injuries. She collapses. The threshold of the door, what should have separated her from that mob, is now a grave marker. In the morning, the Levite throws the door open. He steps over the woman and says, "Get up, it's time to go." But the woman doesn't respond. He picks her up and puts her in the back of his animal. And they take off back home. And as if the indignities that she suffered in life were not enough, he cuts her into 12 pieces and sends her out among the tribes of Israel, as if she's a calling card to show what evil this city has done. What makes the story even worse is the irony behind it. The man was a Levite, a member of the tribe of Levi. He was called by God to make sure people were following his law and knew his word. But the problem was the Levites had failed. The church leadership crumbled, and they failed to do what they were called to do. And because of that, Israel turned into hell. And the sad thing is, we follow the same path today. We'll look at the people who are washed up by society, who are used and abused and broken. See a homeless man, we'll say, you know, if only he had initiative, if only he worked harder, he wouldn't be where he is today. We'll look at a drug addict and say, if only he had some self-control, then he wouldn't be in the mess he's in. We'll look at a single mother and say, you know, if she wasn't a whore, she just closed her legs, then she'd be in a better place. And the Levite looks at the town and says, if only those people weren't so evil and perverted, I would still have my concubine. But the Levite's wrong. The problem isn't the city was ignoring the gospel. The problem is no one was preaching it to them. We crucified God's plan, and we need to resurrect it. Resurrect God's plan. If we were resurrecting God's plan, we would look at the homeless man. We would take care of him. We'd make sure he has somewhere to stay, something to eat, because that's what we're called to do. If we were resurrecting God's plan, we'd look at the drug addict. We'd make sure he would get the help that he needs to get clean. If we were resurrecting God's plan, we'd look at the single mother. We'd make sure she and her child are taken care of. And she would know that she is loved by God, because his people love her. So, how many people is it going to take before we resurrect God's plan? How many people need to die, their fingers digging into the thresholds of our churches, their fingernails chipping away as they scratch to try to get in? How many people are we going to have to step over the thresholds of our houses on our way to church before we realize this isn't the way God wanted it to be? We need to resurrect God's plan. It starts with you, the gospel, and your city. When you leave here and go back to your cities today, work on resurrecting God's plan, making this world the way he wanted it to be. Look at the homeless man. Give him the coat off your back instead of your criticism. Look at the drug addict. Instead of blaming him for his problem, point the finger back at yourself and help him. Look at the single mother. Instead of blaming her for where she is and judging her, take care of her. Make sure she is loved. That's how we resurrect God's plan. When we start doing that, this world will start looking more like what God wants it to be. Resurrect God's plan.